Okay, I'm just gonna give a little overview of what's happening in the kitchen. I'll start with just, pulling this out, which, it's not a lot of cabinetry. I don't know how it's installed. I can only infer, I assume, uh, well, I'm not gonna make any assumptions. There's a hole back here, which perhaps does something with the feet. There's a hole right there, which looks like it connects to a rail, so it might be similar to the IKEA cabinets where there's a mounting rail along the wall. Maybe leveling feet that have adjustments, maybe there. So if this cabinetry gets pulled out, you've got plumbing here that needs to be disconnected, pulled back through presumably. This stuff needs to be disconnected as well. If you tried to pull out the cabinet, separate from the countertop, obviously the sink needs to be dropped out. Plumbing still needs to be disconnected. Countertop is tucked under this piece here, or it appears to be. And then, typically countertop goes in, backsplash goes on to, close up that gap around the wall. So, and that's illustrated if we go over here. You can kind of see that the backsplash drops over. So, pulling the backsplash off would be part of pulling up the worktop. It's just, I feel like that's a pretty complicated thing. Whereas if we get under here right now, you can see that the cabinet has already been altered to accommodate this plumbing coming down through here. And no proposal's been made, in terms of the specific alterations to the cabinet. The idea is that potentially that piece right there, or segments of the back of the cabinet might need to be altered in order to get a preferable angle on this. I don't know if I'll be able to. Right there. Basically that piece threads into the bottom of the tap, the faucet as I call it. But this brass, let's see if I can point to it. That brass piece right there, that's just a nut. So like that could also be tightened. Which there's an angled wrench that has some adjustability. It's on a hinge. That typically they would just reach up there, use one of those to tighten that thing on. Those supply lines are probably a little bit in the way, but they should be able to get like little segments a turn at a time, and it'll take a little bit of time to get that thing tightened on. Actually now you can see like on that right there, it's like, looks like a flathead screwdriver. So even with a long screwdriver, you should be able to get most of that up. So anyway, there's not a lot of room there, and it's like right above this back wall, but it's not, something that somebody who's a professional who's done this before with some tools, and insurance to cover if, they damage something, the risk there is that you damage supply lines, and I understand you wouldn't want the back of the cabinet to be butchered up. Obviously they're, relatively new cabinets. So I understand why you wouldn't want, just anybody coming in here, doing something to the cabinets. But the reality is, if you try to pull up this worktop, these are weak points. Right there's a weak point, right there's a weak point. Here's a weak point. Like these cutouts make really thin pieces, and, you have a heavy worktop, and if that needs to come out, you just risk causing damage. But then you have, I don't think this gets done in a day. That'd be pretty amazing, but, I could be wrong. But anyway, I just wanted to point out again, maybe that gets pulled out then, and then maybe you've got some touch-up paint, maybe the backsplash gets pulled off. If you do want to do those things, it just, it's sort of, just getting to what you want to get to is a pretty big task. So I guess my suggestion is that a small cut in the back of that cabinet to gain access to, you know, a loose tap, which this could keep happening, and then in the future, when you replace the tap, I would assume that you'd go through at least a tap or two in the lifetime of a countertop and a cabinet set. You'd want some kind of access back there. To have to remove the whole kitchen cabinet set to do that seems like an extreme task just to replace that. So the other things are, obviously this is hanging. We have staining on the ceilings, there. I don't know if it's there, or if that's just from the paint not being taken all the way to the edge. It's hard for me to tell. Yeah, it looks like maybe the paint just wasn't taken all the way to the edge. So the other things are, like this here. We've got key. But this, if I, you can see that if I turn that, it doesn't turn on the outside. And if I turn this on the outside, it doesn't do anything to open it. So if we close this while being outside, we would just be locked out, and there's no access to go out and around the house because there's just closed in up front, and then out back you just have the neighbor's yard beyond our yard. So that doesn't work. Maybe that's why this little latch is here anyway, but an inconvenient thing. I think that's it. This thing I'll just note, the freezer, the way that it was mounted, or maybe it was the way that the door was mounted to the freezer, like this was rubbing here, and so I just put like a little piece of cardboard in between the freezer and the fridge, and that works, but I don't know if that's going to hold forever, but it does make, kind of like a little, you can see that the door is kind of sticking out on the bottom, maybe tied up top, especially in relation to the freezer door. So not a big deal. I mean, just, you can see that from when it was rubbing, it was maybe touching this little protective plastic piece, which probably should have been peeled off when it was installed anyway, and rubbed against like the side of the cabinet there. So, but again, outside of our control. I mean, if I wouldn't have put that in there, it would just keep rubbing against it anyway. So that sort of resolved that for now, but maybe the feet need to be adjusted for future, or maybe the cardboard remains the same. Oh, and you probably saw photos from David, but this isn't a big deal for us, but this probably happened from the leak. Just the grout came out.